The Subcommittee on Oversight will come to order. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad Ms. Lerner finally got through security and got here. I was worried about you, but welcome. So, in front of you are the packets containing the written testimony, the biographies, and truth and testimony disclosures for today's witness panels. I now recognize myself for an opening statement for 5 minutes. Good morning, everyone. The title of today's hearing is Top Challenges for Science Agencies, Reports from the Inspectors General, Part 1. Part 2 to follow. This is the first of 2 hearings where we will hear from witnesses from the offices of Inspectors General representing the agencies within this committee's jurisdiction. The object of the hearing is to learn about the major performance and management challenges facing each agency from the perspective of each of the officers of Inspector General. Today, we will hear from the IG offices with jurisdiction over the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the National Science Foundation, and the U.S. Department of Commerce. It is my hope that this information will help inform my colleagues on both sides of the aisle about the issues at the agencies over which we have the responsibility to conduct thorough but appropriate oversight. With the President's budget expected shortly, this hearing will help us, as an authorizing committee, to coordinate with the Appropriations Committee by identifying for that committee programs, projects, and activities that work as opposed to those that need to be modified or perhaps eliminated. There is no shortage of issues. This committee has a history of approving NASA, especially in the area of information technology security, where last year we held a hearing on that topic. Unfortunately, some of the issues that I raised back then are still outstanding today. In addition to the revelation that NASA needs to do more to protect sensitive information from going out the back door through cyber intrusions and lax protocols, I'm increasingly concerned about the possibility of sensitive information going out of the front door, possibly with tacit approval from research centers. The National Aeronautics and Space Act has the dual responsibility of providing, quote, the widest practical dissemination of information concerning its activities and results, unquote, as well as establishing, quote, such security requirements, restrictions, and safeguards as the administrator deems necessary in the interest of national security, unquote. Similarly, the Act also gave NASA broad authority to enter into agreements outside of the normal federal acquisition process. Originally meant to support smaller scale projects, it is increasingly being used for larger multi-million-dollar procurements. NASA is not the only agency that has this authority. The NSF has roughly $11 billion tied up in other transaction authorities, such as cooperative agreements, which, like NASA's Space Act agreements, do not carry the same oversight and transparency requirements as contracts. The Department of Commerce, which includes bureaus such as NOAA, which in turn houses the National Weather Service, has been the focus of this committee since over a year ago we started hearing claims about financial mismanagement and Anti-Deficiency Act violations. That culminated in a September 12, 2012 hearing for which we still have not received agency responses to questions that we submitted for the record. And I hope they'll be forthcoming very soon, but we still haven't heard back from them. And I can't talk about NOAA without mentioning its satellite programs, which are of a great concern to this committee, particularly in the light of potential gaps in future coverage. These are symptoms of what I perceive to be a larger management challenges within NOAA. This exercise of deliberating over a program's performance and challenges is a particularly timely one because, as you all know, starting tomorrow, federal agencies will do the exact opposite and implement across-the-board indiscriminate funding cuts as a result of the sequester. The House of Representatives, on more than one occasion, has tried to offer a solution to prevent these cuts from taking place, but we've hit a wall with the Senate and with the administration. Now, I know I don't always see eye to eye with my friends on the other side of the aisle, but I respect them, and believe that we share the same goal regardless of which side of the room we sit in, and that is to serve our respective constituencies in the best manner possible. And to that end, I urge my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats alike, to take advantage of the opportunity that this hearing presents and question the witnesses about the agencies within their jurisdiction. Now I recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from New York, for an opening statement for 5 minutes. You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much. I, too, share your concerns about the NOAA's response to the committee. But on this, I want to welcome the three witnesses. Inspector Generals, sometimes called IGs, carry an unusual mandate and a heavy burden. Inspector Generals stand on the front line of accountability and work to improve government and protect taxpayer interests. As the kind of cop on the beat in agencies, they function not just as another executive office, but also as Congress's eyes and ears in those agencies. This is why IGs have a statutory responsibility to quickly inform Congress of any significant wrongdoing at their agencies. While some IGs have tried to morph their role into that of a management consultant to agency leadership, and that's fine, it is still extremely important, though, and Congress expects Inspector Generals to view themselves as watchdogs first and foremost. IGs have enormous discretion to go with their great responsibility. Within limits of the law, they can decide what they will and will not pursue, how they will structure their offices, who they will hire and fire, and how they will spend their budgets. The agencies they overlook are in no position to second-guess their actions, as that would undermine the IG's necessary independence. However, this independence, combined with large budgets outside the control of any other office, leaves open the possibility that a bad Inspector General may abuse that position. Inspector Generals are a classic example of the old question, who will watch the watchmen? With no authority over them in their agency, serving at the pleasure of the President, but a President who stands in great distance, and often keeping information about their activities secret from the public and even Congress, the job of ensuring that a IG who is not doing their job would be identified and removed can fall through the cracks. The Chairman's purpose in holding this hearing, it is my understanding, is to explore what the three IGs from NASA, NSF, and Commerce have accomplished in the last year and hope to take on next, and I applaud the Chairman for holding this hearing. I have no reason to doubt that the two Inspector Generals before us have been doing good work and are raising important questions, and I welcome your testimony. This subcommittee staff, however, and members of the news media have reported serious and pressing concerns in the office of the Department of Commerce Inspector General. And yet, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Zinsser, the Commerce Inspector General, has decided not to appear before us or in staff briefings before the hearing. Now, Mr. Smith, I do sincerely appreciate your time and attention. I hope you can understand why the committee members might be disappointed that we don't have direct access to the Department of Commerce IG. It is nothing about your work. You're a fine public servant, but we want to make sure we have direct access to an IG. So, Mr. Chairman, the committee was first alerted to one serious concern when staff discovered that the Inspector General, Mr. Zinsser, let a NOAA investigate itself regarding criminal financial misconduct. The explanations he offered to the staff back in August, to members in September, and then written responses to questions for the record are contradictory, and his office has refused to provide records members requested to better understand what happened. Then in December, the Washington Post reported that Mr. Zinsser, along with his principal assistant for investigations and his general counsel, compelled senior employees to resign and sign non-disclosure agreements that would bar them from disclosing information about the operation of his office to either the Office of Special Counsel, which is the whistleblower protection office in the federal government, or even to Congress itself. Now, why would the IG compel senior officials to relinquish their statutory and, in fact, constitutional right of redress? The conduct reported in the Post should be shocking to conduct for any federal official, let alone an Inspector General. And if we find an Inspector General, who we would hope would listen to whistleblowers, not silence them, is engaged in gag orders, that is not acceptable conduct. The recent Federal Best Places to Work survey brings up other concerns that show that the Department of Commerce IG office was ranking 291 out of 292 places polled, making it among the worst places to work according to the survey. On this survey, 50% of the staff said they were going to look for another job in the next year, and almost half were unsure or felt unsafe in telling senior leadership if they find violations of the law, regulation, or policy. So according to the survey, the Inspector General staff are afraid to report violations of law. I should add that our staff has begun to receive information from former employees at Commerce Department of Inspector General, and some of the allegations are very serious. So for all these reasons, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Wilson, Ms. Bonamici, and I have sent a letter to GAO. We have asked that they open an investigation into the management and conduct of the IG at the Department of Commerce. At a time when we face the possibility of large-scale arbitrary cuts to both domestic and military programs, I believe that any charges of wasting taxpayer dollars or using them to run an ineffective office must be investigated. Congress has the responsibility and authority to hold IGs accountable, and we have to ensure money has not been wasted or ineffectively protected, and that laws have not been broken in the name of enforcement. If indeed Mr. Zinsser or any Inspector General has allowed his office to be abused or become effective, then we in Congress have the responsibility to bring that to light. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask if the article of the Post, the letter from Mrs. Johnson, Ms. Wilson, Ms. Bonamici, and I, and other supporting materials be included after this statement in the record.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Maffei. Part two of this hearing series, that we're doing, part two, will feature the IGs from DOE, EPA, and DOI. At that hearing, the EPA IG also had a conflicting schedule. So this is not unique for a deputy to come and testify, and I appreciate the deputy from the Department of Commerce coming. The committee is working with all the IGs within our jurisdiction. We're trying to get everybody here that we possibly can, and I assure you that this is not unique. We've made compromises like this previously, and we will have to in the future as we go forward, Mr. Maffei. I know you haven't been on this committee very long, but and we welcome you and glad to have you here, and I know that you and I are going to continue to work very strongly together through this process. But I'm as interested as you are as getting to the bottom of all this, because nobody wants to see fraud, waste, and abuse, and we have to count upon our IGs to make sure that that doesn't happen. So that's what this is my objective of doing these hearings, is trying to find out what's going on in these agencies, and I want to have a strong IG system.
That's my concern too, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, and I know it is. We both have that same desire. So just understand that this is not a unique situation today, and I thank you, Mr. Smith, for being here. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I'd like to introduce our first panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Paul Martin, who's been before.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman? I haven't been on the subcommittee, this committee very long, or the subcommittee very long, but my understanding is it is usual to swear in the witnesses, is it not?
We have done so in the past, and we can do that.
I'd ask that we do if it's a usual thing. So. Given that we're an oversight investigator.
It is in my plan to do so, and we just sit tight.
Absolutely. Sorry.
Just sit tight.
As you say, I'm new. So.
Would the chairman yield just for a second, just because?
Absolutely, Mr.
In general,
Full Committee Chair, Mr. Smith.
And just want to explain kind of what our overall policy is. It was my feeling that we didn't need to do so for two reasons. One, under House rules, all witnesses are assumed to be under oath. And two, in the letters to the witnesses, I believe they are, I want to get the gentleman's attention. Just to make those points.
If the minority counsel will listen, please, as he walks off.
That's all right. He's not listening.
Okay. He's listening.
Let me make my 2 points. One, under House rules, witnesses are assumed to be under oath, so I thought it was a little bit redundant to have to swear them in. Second of all, I believe that the letters that the witnesses get inviting them to testify remind them of that fact as well. So we feel like we've got it covered. If the gentleman wants to make an exception to that general rule, that's fine with me. But I just want to reassure him that the witnesses are reminded that they are under oath, one way or the other, whether it's verbally or in writing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
We will.
Mr. Chairman, if you would yield.
Mr. Maffei.
Yeah. My understanding, and this could be mistaken, but my understanding is that in the past years, this subcommittee did administer an oath, whether to remind or whether to reaffirm for whatever reason. And my concern is if we don't do it, and I admit that I didn't know these rules when we did our first subcommittee hearing, but if we don't do it now and consistently, we don't want to imply that it's necessary at any particular time for the witnesses. So whatever we normally do, we should decide that and just normally follow the same rules. And I want to thank the distinguished chairman of the full committee for his comment. Okay.
Well, I'm entertaining unanimous consent request from Mr. Maffei that witnesses take an oath. Hearing no objection, so ordered.
Thank
First witness today is Inspector General of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. As I already mentioned, it's Mr. Paul Martin, who's been here before this committee before, and I appreciate your coming, Mr. Martin. Our second witness is Ms. Allison Lerner, the Inspector General of the National Science Foundation. Our third witness will be Mr. David Smith, Deputy Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Commerce. As our witnesses should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each, and please, because we have votes shortly coming, so if you would, try to maintain within that 5-minute window. And then each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions. Your written testimony will be included in the record of this hearing. It is the practice of this subcommittee on investigations and oversight to receive testimony under oath. Now, if you would now all please stand and raise your right hand, unless you have an objection to taking the oath. Do you solemnly swear to affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that all the witnesses participating have taken the oath, and Mr. Maffei, I like that too, and I wanted to do this myself. We now recognize our first witness, Mr. Martin, to present your testimony. Sir, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Maffei, Chairman Smith, and members of the subcommittee. The successful landing of the Curiosity rover on the surface of Mars in August energized the public about NASA's activities in a way not seen since the final space shuttle flight. Another highlight this past year was the first commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station by SpaceX in October. However, NASA also faced significant challenges, including the need to reprogram funds to address cost overruns in the James Webb Space Telescope. This shift contributed to delays in several ongoing projects and cancellation of several others, including one with the European Space Agency for planned science missions to Mars. At the same time, NASA is busy developing a new rocket, capsule, and related launch infrastructure to enable crewed missions to an asteroid or Mars, expensive and technically complex undertakings in an increasingly austere budget environment. Along with the rest of the federal government, NASA is poised to tumble over the fiscal cliff tomorrow with $894 million in sequestration cuts. Indeed, from our perspective, declining budgets and fiscal uncertainties present the most significant external challenge to NASA. My written statement discusses our complete list of management and performance challenges. This morning, I plan to briefly highlight 3. First, project management. Over its 50-year history, NASA has been at the forefront of science and space exploration. However, in addition to their achievements, many NASA projects share another less positive trait. They cost significantly more to complete and take much longer to launch than originally planned. Last September, the OIG issued a report that identified 4 primary challenges facing NASA as it seeks to achieve project cost, schedule, and performance goals. The agency's culture of optimism, underestimating technical complexity, funding instability, and limited opportunities for project managers' development. Second, NASA's aging infrastructure. 80% of NASA's 4,900 buildings are more than 40 years old and beyond their design life. However, NASA has not been able to fully fund required upkeep costs and estimates its deferred maintenance expenses at $2.3 billion. One way NASA could reduce these costs is to reduce the amount of unneeded infrastructure in its inventory. To be successful, NASA must move beyond its historic keep it in case we need it mindset. In an audit we issued earlier this month, the OIG identified 33 facilities, including wind tunnels, test stands, airfields, and launch-related infrastructure that NASA was neither fully utilizing nor had a future mission need. These facilities cost the agency more than $43 million to maintain in fiscal 2011 alone. And finally, information technology security. 1 year ago, I sat behind this same table and testified alongside the NASA Chief Information Officer about the state of IT security at NASA. Among other things, I mentioned that at the time, only 1% of NASA's laptop computers were fully encrypted, compared to a government-wide rate of 54%. 8 months later, an unencrypted NASA laptop computer containing personally identifiable information on more than 40,000 individuals was stolen from the vehicle of a NASA employee. Agency officials estimate that credit monitoring and other expenses related to the theft could cost NASA up to $850,000. Following that incident, the NASA administrator accelerated the timetable for encrypting the hard drives on all agency laptops. And as of 2 weeks ago, the agency reported an encryption rate for its laptops of 99%. Our audits and investigations continue to identify recurring weaknesses in NASA's IT security program, and we anticipate making additional recommendations as we complete an audit examining the agency's IT governance structure. Re-examination of NASA's overall approach to IT is particularly timely, given that the agency is currently seeking a new CIO. In closing, the National Research Council recently concluded that there is, and I quote, a significant mismatch between the programs to which NASA is committed and the budgets that have been provided or anticipated, end quote. In other words, too many programs are chasing too few dollars. I hope that the NRC's report, together with the ongoing work of the OIG and GAO, will contribute to a dialogue about NASA's future priorities and lead to enactment of a realistic budget that will enable the agency to accomplish its multifaceted mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Now, Ms. Lerner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate this opportunity to discuss the work of the National Science Foundation Office of Inspector General to safeguard federal tax dollars awarded by the foundation and to protect the integrity of NSF's programs and operations. My statement will focus on accountability over cooperative agreements for NSF's large facility construction projects, grants management, and contract monitoring, 3 management challenges that have a direct impact on NSF's ability to carry out its mission of advancing scientific research by funding external awardees. I will also address NSF's efforts to encourage the ethical conduct of research, another top management challenge. Over the past 2 years, my office has issued several audits that have raised serious questions about NSF's accountability over cooperative agreements for high-risk, high-dollar projects. NSF currently has 685 open cooperative agreements totaling nearly $11 billion. 38 of these are valued at over $50 million each and comprise $5.5 billion of the total amount of such agreements. In September of 2012, we issued an alert memorandum to NSF management outlining serious weaknesses in the Foundation's cost surveillance measures for awarding and managing high-risk, high-dollar cooperative agreements. At the pre-award phase of such projects, appropriate controls should include conducting audits of awardees' proposed budgets and accounting systems to ensure that awardees' cost estimates are fair and reasonable, and that their accounting systems are adequate to bill the government properly and to manage funds in accordance with federal requirements. While such audits are not required by law or regulation for cooperative agreements, obtaining such information at the pre-award stage of high-risk, high-dollar cooperative agreements is especially important, as the proposed budget, once approved by NSF, creates the basis upon which awardees can draw down advance funds over the course of the award. NSF does not regularly obtain such audits. Post-award controls for high-risk, high-dollar projects should include incurred cost submissions and audits to ensure that cost claimed are allowable. As with pre-award audits, incurred cost submissions and audits are not required for cooperative agreements by law or regulation, and we're not recommending that NSF obtain them for every agreement. However, such submissions and audits are critical tools for ensuring accountability in high-risk, high-dollar cooperative agreements. Simply stated, these are reasonable and prudent steps to protect taxpayer funds. In December 2012, the NSF director charged a senior advisor in his office with conducting a major assessment of policies and procedures governing NSF-supported large facilities to address these and other matters. We're optimistic that this process will yield more robust oversight and monitoring for NSF's large cooperative agreements. With respect to grants management, oversight and management of awards that is sufficient to safeguard federal funds invested in scientific research has been an ongoing challenge for NSF, as grant recipients request payments as an aggregate dollar amount and are not required to present supporting documentation such as invoices and receipts to receive payments. In the face of these oversight challenges, my office is using automated techniques to supplement traditional audit tools and help us improve our ability to identify high-risk awardees, expand our audit coverage to examine more transactions, and better focus our limited resources on questionable expenditures. In the area of contract monitoring, we continue to recommend that NSF obtain incurred cost audits for cost reimbursable contracts and that it obtain cost accounting disclosure statements from contractors and ensure that they are audited and approved in a timely manner. Incurred cost audits enable management to assess a contractor's compliance with the financial terms and conditions of a contract. An approved disclosure statement is essential to establish how the contractor classifies and bills costs to the government. With respect to the responsible conduct of research, pursuing allegations of research misconduct by NSF-funded researchers continues to be a focus of our investigative work. In recent years, we've seen a significant rise in the number of substantive allegations of such misconduct associated with NSF proposals and awards. It is imperative to the integrity of research funded with taxpayer dollars that we ensure that NSF principal investigators carry out their projects with the highest ethical standards. Finally, we are continuing our efforts with the IG community to combat fraud in the small business innovation research and small business technology transfer programs. We will continue to target our work on areas that pose the highest risk of misuse of taxpayer dollars and to do our utmost to ensure that misused funds are returned to the government. This concludes my statement, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lerner. And now, Mr. Smith, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Maffey, Committee Chairman Smith, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today about the Department of Commerce's top management challenges in fiscal year 13. The Department plays a pivotal role in implementing the President's initiatives for economic recovery and job creation. Like other federal agencies, Commerce faces financial uncertainty this year. I will describe 5 top management challenges which we have identified from our oversight perspective to be the most significant management and performance challenges facing the Department of Commerce. First, stimulate economic growth in key industries, increase exports, and enhance stewardship of marine fisheries. The Department has many government-wide initiatives to implement the President's priorities. Successful implementation could have a profound impact on the nation's economy. However, it requires focused attention by senior management, close coordination with the private sector and other federal agencies, and sustained congressional support. Secondly, increase oversight of resources entrusted by the public and invest for long-term benefits. In this era of constrained budgets, there's a greater risk that management will take shortcuts, loosen internal controls, and de-emphasize oversight to devote resources to other requirements. Therefore, attention to internal controls is critical. Third, strengthen security and investments in information technology. Our recent audits of Bureau IT systems confirm the urgency of fixing the Department's security weaknesses. While we support senior management's recent actions to strengthen the Chief Information Officer's authority, it is too early to judge their effectiveness. Fourth, implement a framework for acquisition project management and improve contract oversight. In fiscal year 2011, the Department obligated approximately $2.4 billion on contracts for goods and services. To maximize these funds, Commerce needs to strengthen its acquisition and contract management practices. While it has made some progress, we continue to find weaknesses in how the Department plans, administers, and oversees its contracts. For example, our recent audit of contract award fees and award terms found that more than $100 million in questioned costs and funds that could have been put to better use. Fifth, reduce the risks of cost overruns, schedule delays, and coverage gaps for NOAA's satellite programs. Satellite programs remain the department's largest investment. They encompass almost 20% of Commerce's budget. Top-level management attention will continue to be needed to prevent cost overruns and minimize the impact of satellite coverage gaps. We recently issued a report on the Joint Polar Satellite System program and are completing work on an audit of the Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellite R series program. Over the past several years, the department has experienced many challenges in the areas I have discussed here. To its credit, top-level management is working diligently to address its management challenges. Commerce leadership must continue to show the way forward to establish a culture of accountability. This is perhaps their greatest challenge of all. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee today, and I will be pleased to respond to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Excellent job. All our witnesses stand within your time constraints, and I trust that all members on both sides are very pleased with our witnesses' testimony, and I appreciate y'all's testimony and for y'all being available for question today. Reminding members, the committee rules limit question to 5 minutes. The chair at this point will open the round of questions. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Other transaction authority may sound like a mundane term, but agencies are increasingly relying on this obscure acquisition tool. Normally, agencies must comply with federal contracting law, but oftentimes Congress gives agencies other mechanisms in which to enter agreements outside of the law. In the instance of NASA, they were provided the Space Act Agreement, which is authority given in 1958, when the agency was created in order to advance NASA's mission and programs by cooperating with outside entities. For NSF, the authority was granted by 31 U.S.C. Section 3605. Initially designed to only fund small projects, this is a serious concern for this committee. NASA used Space Act agreements to fund the $750 million development of the Commercial Orbital Transportation System. And NSF now has over 685 cooperative agreements totaling nearly $11 billion to fund the construction of its major research facilities. The NASA IG just initiated an audit of the NASA Space Act agreements on Monday. I appreciate y'all doing that. But it was initiated on Monday, and the NSF IG issued an alert memo on cooperative agreements last September, and thank you also. Mr. Martin and Ms. Lerner, to the best of your knowledge, how has this other transactional authority implemented, how is this other transactional authority implemented by the agency that you oversee? Ms. Lerner, we'll start first. Ladies first.
Sorry about that. The red light had me confused. NSF, as we noted, has 685 cooperative agreements. 38 of those are over $50 million. So the area of greatest concern to my office, obviously, is the high dollar, high risk cooperative agreements. And the concern that we have, based on the work that we have done, is that there aren't adequate oversight controls in place to ensure that the funds that are directed to those types of awards are properly stewarded and subject to the same sort of accountability that you would see, that you would expect in these lean budget times. And we have conducted several audits and provided a great deal of feedback to the agency in that area.
Well, thank you very much. If you would please let this committee know what we need to do to try to rectify that. Mr. Martin.
NASA has 3 types of Space Act agreements it's entered into. There's over 700 reimbursable Space Act agreements, approximately 500 non-reimbursable Space Act agreements, and 3 or 4 what they call funded Space Act agreements. As you indicated in the preface to your question, earlier this week we initiated an audit looking at all 3 of these types of Space Act agreements, focusing in particular on reimbursable Space Act agreements to ensure that NASA is getting, and the taxpayer is getting its appropriate funding.
Okay. I'm going to ask a series of questions, both of y'all, if you would answer this. How is the agency required to provide advance notice of solicitation? How do the agencies ensure fair competition? Are they required to make a public list of all agreements and amounts in a transparent manner? And are there sufficient controls to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse, as well as mismanagement? Mr. Martin?
Jump in. Really, you've raised a lot of the questions that will be the focus of our ongoing audit now. The GAO looked at the issue of Space Act agreements in the last 2 or 3 years, did some high-level work checking on sort of broad internal controls. The IG's office at NASA is going to do a deep dive and get into the details of these agreements.
Very good. Ms. Lerner?
I do believe that NSF requires advance notice of solicitation or competition for all of its large cooperative agreements. And certainly, as I noted earlier, our office does have real concerns about whether there are sufficient controls in place to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse.
Well, please make sure that this committee is notified, because we want to be sure that there's transparency as well as to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. Mr. Martin, this committee is reviewing allegations related to ITAR violations at the Ames Research Center, and they seem to be very grave allegations there as far as mismanagement there. It is our understanding that your office has already reviewed these allegations. In order to assist our oversight, please provide the committee with all records related to your office's review of these allegations. I appreciate your doing so. Thank you. Is that assurance that we can get those?
Yeah, we are having actually a conversation tomorrow with staff on your committee as well as Mr. Wolf's committee to go over some of these issues related to the concerns about export control matters at Ames Research.
Well, there are just tremendous allegations there of tremendous waste, fraud, and abuse in that instance. So I hope that you all will look into them very strongly and look at those allegations. My time's up. Now I recognize Mr. Maffei for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, are you aware of any investigations of suspected Anti-Deficiency Act violations happening in the Commerce Inspector General's office during Mr. Zinser's tenure?
Yes, sir.
You are aware. Can you enlighten us as to any details about that suspected violation and how it was investigated?
I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you referring to investigations?
Oh, no, I'm referring to an investigation of a suspected Anti-Deficiency Act violation within the IG's office itself. In other words, the IG's office may or may not have, but there's an allegation that it had violated the act.
No, sir, I am not. Okay,
you're not. Okay. Given that you've been at about 8 weeks at your job.
I think I'm into my third month. My first trimester, yes, sir.
So am I. So anyway, I respect that, but also I want to point out to the committee that Mr. Smith wouldn't necessarily know, even if there was. At this point, he hasn't been there very long. The law does require that an Anti-Deficiency Act violation can only be declared as having happened officially through a decision in the agency's general counsel office. Do you know if Mr. Zinser's office has ever had to refer a suspected Anti-Deficiency Act violation on his own office to the Department of Commerce General Counsel?
No, sir.
Yeah, of course. You don't know.
I don't know.
Okay. Just trying to figure out how this would all work, I want to ask Mr. Martin and Ms. Lerner, what would happen if there was a suspected Anti-Deficiency Act violation within an IG office? In other words, if the IG's office spends money improperly, who would investigate that? Would the IG himself or herself?
If it's an allegation against the Inspector General, him or herself, there's an overarching organization called SIGI, made up of Inspectors General. There's an integrity committee as part of SIGI, and the allegation of misconduct would go to that committee.
Ms. Lerner, you agree with that? Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Smith, I just asked if you could look into it just to see if there was any suspected Anti-Deficiency Act violation. These things could represent, real waste. They could also just be a technical issue. So if you wouldn't mind checking and providing that information for this committee.
Yes, sir. I would ask if I could get with your staff to find out any further details, so I may better do that.
That would be very good for us.
Thank you.
Now, We've gotten a report that the Inspector General specifically advertised for investigative staff in the state of Arizona and hired an investigator based in Arizona and now pays for that employee to spend up to 3 weeks every month in the D.C. area. Now, if that's true, it would represent real waste of taxpayer money, as you have to pay the base pay, of course, but as well as temporary duty pay for the time they spend in Washington. And this could be several $1,000s each month. Do you know how many employees at the Commerce IG's office, employees who are put on regular TDY status for more than a week a month?
I know of one investigator that we currently have on staff that is actually working out of our Denver office on investigations he is conducting out in that area.
Do you know how much time he spends in Washington every month?
No, sir, I don't have that information available.
Could you find out, and also whether there are any other employees that are on this TDY status for more than a week a month?
Yes, sir.
On a regular or semi-regular basis. Do you have any idea how much? Well, we'll just leave it at that. Obviously, Mr. Chairman, I'm worried that these issues with this office could extend to waste and management of the taxpayer funds by the IG himself. These are things that the committee staff here has had multiple sources on. So I would like to at least see if we can't get the Commerce IG's office to sort of address them. Some of them are obvious. If there's an employee that lives in Arizona, and spends lots of time in Washington D.C., those are facts. We can find that out. So I'd like to make sure that the IG's office is willing to provide us with that information. We do rely on the Inspector Generals to be the watchdog on everyone else. So it is, one of those things that we want to make sure that they are careful stewards of taxpayer money themselves for their own operation, and then we'll also look into what's it called, SIGNY? SIGNY. We'll also look into SIGNY. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the remaining 3 seconds of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Maffei. What's SIGNY? What's that an acronym for?
This is one of the worst acronyms in government. Council on Integrity. Council of Inspector Generals for Integrity and Efficiency.
Okay, thank you very much. Just wanted that for the edification. Now I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Smith from Texas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Martin, thank you for your testimony. Appreciate the good job you've been doing over the years as well. You mentioned James Webb in your testimony a few minutes ago, having been behind schedule and over cost. Has that generally been corrected to your knowledge? And I happened to have spoken to the administrator of NASA yesterday, and he seemed to think that James Webb is going to be fully funded and on schedule, get back on schedule. Do you see it that way too?
I do. Okay. I do. And in fact, I was at Johnson Space Center on Tuesday of this week, and they have a thermal vacuum chamber they're retrofitting, built in the 60s, and they're going to put James Webb in there and ice it down.
I expect to be there in March, and I'll double check. So that's good news. Ms. Lerner, you referred to questionable expenditures. We've heard about grant problems. You mentioned those as well, research misconduct and so forth. I don't know that you got much into the way of solutions, if you want to mention a couple of solutions, but I'd also ask you just for a rough estimate as to how many colleges or universities sort of have been suspected of, I'm not going to find them guilty right now, but have been allegedly engaged in some of these questionable practices. So 2 questions. How many universities, colleges do you think need a second look at their expenditures? And 2, do you have some solutions?
In terms of the first question, the large facilities that we are interested in are often run not by colleges and universities, but by consortiums of nonprofits.
I know. I was asking about a subset because they've been getting some attention.
Exactly. So I don't have precise numbers on that. We can certainly try and get back to you on that.
Great. And I'd actually like the names as well.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll do what we can there. On the issue of research misconduct, and that's defined as fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism at the federal level, over the last 10 years, we've had approximately 850 allegations of plagiarism and 150 or approximately allegations of fabrication or falsification of data. Those are allegations. We've had 120 findings of research misconduct.
Which represents an increase, I understand, over
Exactly.
past years. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, and we are seeing a particular increase in the area of data manipulation. In the last 2 years, we've gotten 24 allegations of data manipulation, and that is the same amount as we got in the previous 7 years.
Okay, now what do you do when you see evidence of this, getting to the idea of solutions? Do you call it to their attention? Do you have oversight? Do you threaten? What do you do?
We absolutely call it to their attention. NSF, as with other science funding agencies, has a regulation for how you investigate research misconduct, and we play an integral part in that process at NSF. All allegations of research misconduct are supposed to be brought to our attention, to the IG's attention. We do an initial inquiry to try and see if that looks like there's substance to the allegation. If there is, then we refer the matter to the university for investigation. When we send the matter to the university for investigation, we examine the procedures that they have in place for conducting those investigations. We look at the people who are going to participate in the panel that does the investigation to see if they have conflicts.
And are you generally satisfied with the subsequent actions taken by university officials?
For the most part, yes. I mean,
And
most do.
Being corrected and so forth.
Exactly. And if they don't do it right, then we fix it when it comes to us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, is it true that Inspector General staff was prohibited by NOAA from attending some of the Program Management Council meetings?
Yes, sir.
And why is it important for Inspector General staff to attend those meetings?
To give you one example, we got the notes and minutes from a meeting that said a decision had been made based on discussions that occurred within the room. We were not privy to those discussions, so we do not know what management's thought process was. Therefore, we cannot opine on that, nor can we provide any information that may benefit them.
Would you object if I sent a letter today to NOAA insisting that they allow Inspector General staff to attend such meetings?
I would thank you very much, sir.
Okay, consider it done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Peters, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question for Mr. Smith. On December 3rd, 2012, the Washington Post published a story about how the Commerce Inspector General, Mr. Todd Zinsser, forced departing senior investigative staff into signing non-disclosure agreements, which barred those 4 members of his staff from approaching either the Office of Special Counsel, which exists to protect whistleblowers, or Congress to discuss what they had witnessed in Mr. Zinsser's office. And Mr. Smith, I assume you saw that story.
Yes, sir.
Have you asked for an explanation about what would be the reason to do that, either from Mr. Zinsser or Mr. Bytel, who's the Principal Assistant Inspector General for Investigations and Whistleblower Protections, or Wade Green, the General Counsel?
In answer to your question, sir, I would say that I am aware of the circumstances behind that, and we as the Inspector General's office disagree with the characterization that appeared in the press.
Okay, in what respect?
We do not believe that the interpretation that was provided that those were gag orders is correct. We actually used the definition of disparage within the EEOC website, which says telling of falsehoods and lies with reckless regard to the truth. That is the connotation that was used. In addition, we have been working with OSC. They have, through the MSPB, and they have, in fact, requested through the arbitrator that we submit a joint motion to dismiss the stay as well as dismiss the protective order. And the last we heard from OSC, they consider through the additional language that we submitted on those non-disclosure agreements as well as the Whistleblower Enhancement Act that was passed, that is no longer an issue.
Has the committee been provided copies of those agreements?
I believe they have, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry, I haven't seen those. I guess I would express to you a concern that that there be any kind of inhibition placed on what people might say, because even if I guess what you're saying is that the limitation was confined to what would be considered disparaging remarks.
Yes, sir. Lies, falsehoods.
Okay. I guess I'd like to see, for my own preference, and I will look at those agreements, is that in a context of open government, which is particularly important in California and we think works pretty well, that when people make statements that whether they're lies or not are the kinds of things that can shake out in the sunshine, and that we don't want to ever intimidate people from making statements about what's going on because they're afraid that they're going to be in some sort of litigation or be accused of lying or telling a falsehood. And that in itself can be intimidating. So I must say that I'll wait to see the result of what OSC says, but it raises a great concern that anyone would be asked to sign anything that inhibits their ability to talk in the context of the whistleblower law that's been provided for our protection and for the protection of taxpayers. And I realize you're new and that this preceded you. I guess you and Mr. Maffei and I are kind of all on the same timeline. But I found that, and I understand, we're in politics. We know that everything you read in the press isn't necessarily always 100% accurate. But I would say that this is extremely was something of great concern when I heard about it, and I'll look forward to following up on it in the future.
Yes, sir, if I may. I actually understand that kind of intimidation and fear if employees disclose things. I myself had to sign a non-disclosure agreement when I left the employment of the House and was warned on numerous occasions not to discuss any of the work that I had done here.
Well, unless it's classified material, I think that that's inappropriate. And so I would say the notion that we would do that, I think, is equally inappropriate unless it's classified. So I guess I would take that not as a justification, but something we ought to look into ourselves. Maybe I'd ask Ms. Lerner or Mr. Martin, are you aware of any instances in which your agencies or your IGs might have asked people to sign these kinds of non-disclosure agreements? Mr. Martin's given me a no. Ms. Lerner, I can see that even without their microphones on. So I'd ask the record to reflect that, and again, express my deep concern about this kind of behavior. I hope it does not remain the norm. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize the chair for 5 minutes. Mr. Martin, you issued a report a couple weeks ago on NASA's management and infrastructure standards, and in that report, you used the term political intervention. And I want to ask you about 3 examples of political intervention. Number 1, the ARC jet facility at Johnson, the platform for the A3 test stand at Stennis, and, of course, the Constellation. On your report, page 21, you mentioned letters signed by 30 members of Congress, most of them from Texas, opposed to the closing of the ARC jet facility at Johnson. I'm informed that the ARC jet facility was needed to test Orion's Constellation crew capsule, still going to be used, by the way, their heat shield. So I can understand why members of Congress oppose closing down the ARC jet facility, because it could jeopardize the upcoming SLS. That's number 1. Number 2, the A3 test stand at Stennis. Your report on page 22 also flagged the A3 test stand as political intervention. The test stand was intended to test the J2X engines for Constellation. As you know, Congress included language in the 2010 NASA Authorization Act instructing NASA to complete the test stand, which NASA wanted to mothball. You note that the stand was already 65% complete, and taxpayers had spent $292 million. But your report fails to mention the test stand was canceled because the administration canceled Constellation. I think that's correct. Both Democrat and Republican Congresses had endorsed Constellation as a replacement for the space shuttle or the successor program. Why do you interpret actions by members of Congress, including a law passed by Congress and signed by the President, as political interference, but don't consider the cancellation of Constellation as political interference?
I think that what we were attempting to do in that report and I thought we were effective in doing so, was pointing out the many obstacles that stand in NASA's way to reducing its aged infrastructure. And a lot of the point, but one of the points you pointed out was the interest in members of Congress and to retain certain infrastructure and capabilities at centers within their states or within their districts. A lot of the other problem that NASA has with handling its infrastructure is the fact that it's sort of changing programs or changing directions. And you pointed out the cancellation of the Constellation was a major shift in the approach for manned space flight.
Yeah, don't want to interrupt on a very tight time schedule here. Did the administration have a right to cancel the program put into law by Congress?
I don't believe that's a question that an inspector general at an agency is appropriate to answer.
Well,
did they have a legal right to do so?
Yeah, is that appropriate? I think you're supposed to tell us if we're operating in according to good standards, and I think that's a significant question that demands an answer, which nobody's really been willing to step up and talk about. You have a congressional program in place and an administration that unilaterally cancels the program. $9 billion flushed down the toilet. You don't think that ought to be on the radar screen?
Well, it certainly is on Congress's radar screen in the administration's. In the NASA Authorization Act of 2010, Congress worked with the administration and came up with a new direction of moving forward. You mentioned the SLS and the MPCV. It's not an Inspector General's role to say whether that's good policy or bad policy. It's Inspector General's role to follow the money.
Well, these instances that you mentioned in your report, I think were directly linked to and inextricably entwined with those decisions. And like I said, I'm new on this committee,
right?
And I don't have all the background, but during the review that I've done, I hadn't seen that issue addressed, and I think it'd be significant, and I think maybe some other members of the committee would have an interest in knowing that too.
Okay. Again, we were pointing out there's significant pressures on NASA of multiple kinds, including political pressures, when it's attempting to address an issue of how to handle its aged infrastructure.
I see my time has expired. Mr. Schweikert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lerner, you actually had a couple things in your testimony that I found interesting. First one, you were saying you were starting to do some, forgive me for paraphrasing, data mining to find bad acts. Can you share with me first what you're doing within that modeling and how effective you're finding it?
What we are doing is augmenting our traditional approach to auditing by using data analytics, and data analytics enable us to kind of better target. If we do 20 or 30 audits in a year, that's all that we can do. So we have to, when NSF makes thousands of awards a year, be very careful where we go and do our audit work. Data analytics enables us to better target our limited resources to the right places where risk looks to be high. And when we get to the institution, then we are able to, instead of looking at 2 or 3 awards that have NSF money and 20 to 30 transactions in each, we can look at all of the awards and all of the transactions under them and identify anomalies that warrant further review. It's a starting point, not an end point, but it greatly enhances what we can see and how we can do our work.
And Mr. Chairman, Ms. Lerner, I am actually a big fan of that. I'm actually married to someone who, one of her specialties was accounting models into, accounting data into statistical models and trying to find those anomalies. And it gives you a chance to be able to look at huge data sets and find the center. And I hope actually from up and down the auditing world out there that we're seeing more of this. I'm going to commit one of my sins here, and you also touched on that you have found some fraud and some bad acts. Real quickly, would you tell me an anecdotal of something you consider outrageous and how it was conducted?
You mean using the new data?
No, just anything that was found.
Oh, anything, golly. There are, we certainly see situations where awards, NSF awards, the work is completed, but funding remains, and then long after the award is done, costs from other projects are transferred to it to use up the awards, the funds that remain, that don't have anything to do with the reason that the award was provided in the first place.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Lerner, so what you're saying is where a university or institution may have multiple awards, they run their fund dry and they start to do transfer of costs.
Yes, we can see that now, and with these new techniques.
And the data mining is also is sophisticated enough to look for all those types of silos.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing what we can see, and it enables us to have a much stronger set of evidence when we go to the agency with better support for the costs that we are questioning.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Lerner, and not that I don't love the rest of you, but this one interests me. Do you also end up using the data or auditing mechanics on also how awards are given out, not only how they're performing? Because over the years we've had, and even on a personal basis, lots of noise on how National Science Foundation ultimately does their awards, and sometimes how certain personalities or people with great writing skills. Is there been a data metric to sort of audit why and where those awards are going? We
haven't established metrics in that area, but certainly if the data exists, it's something that could be done. The question is coming up with the right business rules to put into the system to surface the anomalies.
Okay, because I thought there was a chart going around last year showing how certain institutions seem to dominate in collection or obtaining the awards, where a lot of so if you look sort of the bell curve, it's sort of going to just sort of a handful of institutions. Am I off base on that?
I sincerely doubt that you are.
Okay. In my last couple of seconds to our other gentleman, data mining being used in your areas of specialty.
Sir, the data mining is not necessarily being used at the Department of Commerce, but when I did work at the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, we used it extensively, and in fact the gentleman behind me, Mr. Brett Baker, was in charge of that whole project, and we found discrepancies within the purchase card program, within the charges billed by transportation companies for military household moves, as well as many, many other things.
And I'm over time, but Mr. Martin?
We do the same thing. We've done audits of credit card, purchase card, also SBIR audit, the Small Business Innovation Research grants that are given thousands by NASA.
I am over time, but Mr. Chairman, thank you for your patience. But when we ask, multi-billion-dollar programs to be, and if we were in private sector, there would be hundreds and hundreds of auditors for things that big. Maybe data is actually part of the future of how we find bad acts.
Thank you. All of us, Mr. Target, are very interested in doing this, and people have to be held responsible and accountable. We're going to have votes in about somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes from now, so we're going to go to a second round of questions for 2 minutes each. So if you could, just make sure that your answers are real tight and short, if you could, so that we can get as much done here before we have to go for votes. Conducting oversight on NOAA took up a disproportionate amount of this subcommittee's time last year, or in the last Congress, actually. One of the recurring weaknesses that we encountered was the poor financial management of the agency. We've seen numerous Anti-Deficiency Act violations, the solicitation of a magician for training purposes, an independent review team's description of CFO's oversight of the JPSS program as, quote, dysfunctional, unquote, a fisheries enforcement accounting system that incentivized corruption, and budget development process that is no longer tied to requirements. Ms. Smith, given the gross negligence in Congress that we uncovered in Congress last year, what work are you planning for the coming year tied to NOAA financial oversight? And before you answer, let me just say, Mr. Martin and Ms. Lerner, I hope y'all are looking at these same sort of things, but I'm focused on Mr. Smith and NOAA at this point. Mr. Smith.
We currently continue to receive hotline complaints concerning the NOAA reprogramming. We are very glad to see that NOAA has brought on Grant Thornton to review basically their budget books to find out what all this stuff is. We are continuing to talk to NOAA officials. We're very glad to see that they actually brought on a permanent CFO to look at some of this stuff. In addition, we just finished an audit of the JPSS program, as well as currently doing an audit of the GOES-R program. So we are still actively involved in the high-risk areas and the known problems within NOAA.
Is it appropriate for Grant Thornton to be overlooking this since he reports to the person who's involved in all this?
Yes, sir, I believe it is, because they are an independent entity that may not be tainted by the culture that we found existed there, that basically said the reason the reprogrammings were done was to succeed with the mission.
Well, we need, to use a trite phrase, the fox washing the hen house is not appropriate, and I hope y'all all look into that. My 2 minutes is up. Now, Mr. Maffei, for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I was interested in this Office of Personnel Management sponsored employee viewpoint survey. In 2012, it showed Deputy Inspector General Smith that the office that you work in was next to last as the worst place to work at federal offices, 291 out of 292 offices, and over half of the staff in the Commerce IG's office said they would try to leave the office in the next year. Did you know about this before you took your position?
No, sir. The results did not come out until late December.
Okay. Well, I thank you for your service. The bottom line is the survey suggests that the staff is almost evenly split between those who feel safe reporting violations of laws, rules, regulations to the Inspector General, and those who are uncertain or expect retaliation for such reporting. That sounds like a highly dysfunctional environment, at least according to this survey. I'm going to assume you don't find that acceptable. Are there any programs that are going to be put in place to kind of improve that workplace atmosphere?
Yes, sir, there is. In fact, I have been specifically designated as to be in charge of that. I have already initiated several employee working groups, and they have met. We are trying to get to the reasons behind the survey. In addition to that, I would like to point out the fact that even though the difference between the positive and the neutral negative may not be where we want it to be, it is encouraging to see that the number of negative responses from last year's survey has actually decreased for almost every question, and I do consider that progress.
Okay, well, I'm going to remain very, very interested in that. And also, just to echo what Congressman Peters said earlier, obviously there might be reasons for nondisclosure in the case of a lawyer-client privilege, privacy of a particular person, or national security or other kind of sensitive information. But otherwise, the appearance of some sort of a problem is certainly there whenever these sort of nondisclosure agreements are signed. So I would hope that in the future the Commerce IG's office would recognize that. Well, thank you. My time is up.
Sure, if I may just respond to that one. We have discontinued the use of those nondisclosure agreements.
I'm glad to hear it, Mr. Smith. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired now. Mr. Posey, you're recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to Mr. Martin, and just want to be sure we show him some love, too. Hopefully this will just be yes or no. But the NASA IG report from August 9th, 2012, highlights that NASA acknowledges the need to clarify the criteria centers should use to determine if underutilized property has a current or future mission-related use. That's on Roman numeral page 6 of the report. Would it be fair to say that in regards to undeveloped land, not structures in the ground or infrastructure in the ground, but undeveloped land at a center that has never been designated for future use in any plan is a potential candidate for excess property, i.e. Leasing, conveyance, enhanced use agreements? Is that fair to say?
Based on your question, I would think so, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. I don't think we have time to go into another round of questioning, and I want to thank the witnesses for y'all's valuable testimony today. The members of the committee may have additional questions for you, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Please do that very expeditiously. As I mentioned in my opening statement, we've asked for some reports or answers to questions that have not been produced thus far, and I'm very disappointed in the administration for not providing those answers to the questions for this whole committee for both sides. But I hope and I trust that y'all will answer those very expeditiously. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions for members. The witness is excused. Thank y'all so much. We're now adjourned.